He walked through New York like a hero. But the Mafia saw him as a threat. Joe Colombo had the crowds, the cameras, the charisma, but behind every handshake was a shadow waiting to strike. When a Mafia boss steps into the spotlight, the question isn't if someone will pull the trigger, it's who fires first. This is the true story of the man who tried to shine brighter than the Mafia and paid for it in blood. To the crowds on Mulberry Street, Joe Colombo was a man of the people, a charismatic leader with a warm grin and a handshake firm enough to win trust on impact. He was photographed with politicians, marched beside activists, posed before microphones, and cheering families like he was born for the spotlight. He spoke with conviction, dressed with class, and carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who seemed untouchable. But that was all facade. Because behind the polished charm, behind the speeches and the smiles, lived a truth carved in blood. Joe Colombo was the boss of one of New York's most powerful Mafia families. And every time he stepped into the light, he dragged the shadows behind him. Colombo understood better than anyone that power is perception. People believe what they see, and he gave them something irresistible to look at. He played the role with ease, the respectable businessman, the civic organizer, the defender of Italian-American rights. He knew how to stand just close enough to legitimacy to be celebrated and just close enough to danger to be feared. To the city, he was a rising public figure. To the five families, he was becoming a problem. To himself, he was untouchable. He thought he could balance it all, the glamour and the grit, the applause and the secrecy. He didn't see that the two worlds were already bleeding into each other. Maybe he refused to look. Maybe he didn't want to. Because once you admit the danger, you face the truth. Those who shine too brightly become targets. In the quiet corners of New York, the back rooms of restaurants, the smoke-filled social clubs where whispers carried more weight than bullets, the other bosses watched Colombo climb. At first, some admired him. A boss with a public following? A man who could rally thousands with one speech? It looked like influence. It felt like power. But admiration in the Mafia has a short shelf life. Envy comes next. Then sabotage. Then blood. Colombo's growing fame became a flame in a room full of gasoline. The old men muttered over espresso cups, unable to understand why a boss, would willingly step into cameras, newspapers, and crowds. In their eyes, Colombo was dancing on a landmine, smiling as he did it. He thought the spotlight made him strong. They thought it made him stupid. And the streets, they watched silently, waiting to see who would be right. Yet for all the danger, Colombo loved the attention, loved the energy, loved the crowds chanting his name. The electricity of fame was addictive, and he was already overdosing. He waved from podiums like a politician, but his eyes were always scanning, always calculating. This was the contradiction that defined him. A man preaching justice with the voice of a criminal king. Every flash of a camera made him look more legitimate and more vulnerable. Every interview made him appear more powerful and more exposed. And what he refused to admit was simple. The Mafia doesn't tolerate exposure. Visibility is weakness. Cameras are weapons. And fame is fatal. Still, Colombo convinced himself he could defy the rules that thousands of men died to protect. He believed he could rewrite what the Mafia was supposed to be. Let the other bosses hide in the dark. He would step forward. He would show the world that he was bigger than the streets, bigger than the commission, bigger than the codes etched in blood since the first Sicilian oath. But deep down, even he knew the truth he would never say aloud. If the lights ever turned off, all that would be left was the darkness he came from. And darkness always collects its debts. Every light casts a shadow, and Colombo's shadow grew longer with every passing day. A shadow full of enemies he couldn't see, allies who were no longer loyal, and ghosts whispering warnings he didn't want to hear. Walk down Mulberry Street, and you'd see his admirers. Walk down President Street, and you'd hear the whispers. Walk into any backroom gathering of men in tailored suits and hard eyes, and you'd feel the tension tightening like a noose. Colombo was walking two lines at once, one paved with applause, one soaked in blood. No man in the Mafia had ever walked both successfully. None ever would. To the public, he was hope. To his enemies, he was bait. To the Mafia, he was a problem waiting to be solved. But in Joe Colombo's mind, the danger was just noise, a distant hum drowned out by the roar of crowds calling his name. He believed he could control the narrative, control the streets, control the bosses. He believed his charm could neutralize guns, and that public love could shield him from private death sentences. But every time he stepped on stage, every time he signed an autograph or shook a stranger's hand, he was drawing a bigger target on his chest. The Mafia watched, the city watched, and the shadows waited. Because in a world where secrecy is survival, Colombo was daring fate to strike him down. He thought he was rewriting the rules. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the spotlight made him powerful. He forgot one simple truth. The brighter the light, the darker the threat it hides. Welcome, my beautiful family and friends, to my YouTube channel. Please click on subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. Now back to the story. The higher Joe Colombo climbed, the quieter the Mafia became. And in the underworld, silence is never a good sign. At first, the bosses tolerated Colombo's public crusades, even admired the crowds he pulled, the speeches that electrified the streets, the way he turned his name into a brand of righteous fury. But admiration has a half-life in the Mafia. The longer Colombo stayed in the spotlight, the more unease grew in the shadows. No one felt it more sharply than Carlo Gambino. The old patriarch moved through the world like a ghost, soft voice, gentle eyes, hands folded neatly behind his back, as if he were nothing more than a polite grandfather. But behind that calm exterior was the sharpest mind the Mafia had ever produced. Gambino built empires without raising his voice, eliminated enemies without lifting a finger, and ruled New York with an intelligence so cold it bordered on supernatural. He didn't need to yell to be feared. The quiet was enough. And it was Gambino who sensed the danger first. While Colombo stood before cameras rallying thousands, Gambino sat in his quiet kitchen in Brooklyn, stirring espresso and watching the news as if studying a crime scene. Every time Colombo appeared on screen, Gambino's jaw tightened. Not with anger, with calculation. He saw what Colombo didn't. Publicity was poison. Attention was a death sentence. And Colombo was overdosing. You could almost hear the old man thinking, "What is he doing? Why is he drawing eyes to us? Does he understand nothing? Or does he understand too much?" The five families had survived for decades because they lived in the cracks of society, quiet, unseen, unspoken. The law could not destroy what it could not find. And Colombo, with his rallies and microphones and reporters swarming around him, was dragging that ancient invisibility into the light. Men like Gambino had spent their entire lives avoiding that light. Men like Colombo were walking straight into it. And the Mafia watched in growing dread. In the social clubs of Brooklyn and the backrooms of Manhattan, murmurs began to build like a pressure in the walls. He's getting reckless. He's forgetting himself. This isn't how bosses behave. Young soldiers spoke in hushed tones. Capos exchanged glances they didn't dare put into words. Old-timers shook their heads and muttered about tradition, about codes, about the days when men who sought fame found bullets instead. Every conversation ended the same way, a quiet, nervous look toward the door, as if Colombo himself might stroll in with a camera crew. Because in the Mafia, danger doesn't come loud. It comes quiet. It comes whispered. It comes hinted in unfinished sentences. And the whispers around Colombo were growing louder by the day. Some wondered if fame had gone to his head. Others wondered if he was becoming reckless. But a darker thought began to surface, the one no one wanted to say too loudly. Is Colombo becoming a liability? The word liability in the Mafia is not a description. It is a diagnosis. A warning. A death sentence waiting to be signed. The FBI was already watching closely, energized by Colombo's sudden public presence. Judges, detectives, senators, every reporter in the city. Eyes were turning toward the Mafia like never before, all because of one man's quest for visibility. To the public, Colombo was a hero. To the Mafia, he was a spotlight shining on secrets that should never see daylight. And Gambino, the master of quiet, the architect of shadows, knew what had to happen if Colombo didn't step back. Meanwhile, Colombo carried on as if nothing were wrong. He believed he was making history, not enemies. He believed he was rising, not slipping. He believed the Mafia respected his boldness, his charisma, his ability to rally crowds like a politician. He didn't understand that respect and resentment look nearly identical until the gun goes off. He moved through the streets with confidence, unaware that every man he passed was watching him with new eyes. Some admired him, others feared him, but all of them wondered the same thing. Is he endangering us all? The Mafia was built on secrecy, the sacred code of Omerta, the oath that outlived kings and governments. It protected the guilty and silenced the innocent. It was the very oxygen the Mafia breathed. And to the bosses, Colombo's public crusade felt like suffocation. He was forgetting the code. He was ignoring the rules. He was daring tradition to break around him. In their world, that was unforgivable. The tension thickened like humidity before a storm. Meetings were requested in whispers. Alliances shifted subtly behind Colombo's back. Men who once stood beside him now watched from the sidelines, weighing loyalty against survival. And somewhere in the shadows, whether in a quiet living room, a dim club, or a silent car ride, the first question was asked out loud. What do we do about Joe? No one answered. No one had to. Because in the Mafia, once a man is questioned, he is already condemned. The fear was growing, the suspicion spreading, the whispers tightening like a rope around Colombo's neck. And the cruelest irony? Colombo never heard them. He was too busy listening to the cheers. For every man who clapped for him on the streets, there was another man in a back room sharpening his fear into anger. For every news camera that captured his smile, there was another set of Mafia eyes watching with rising paranoia. For every speech, every rally, every chant of his name, the shadows behind him grew a little darker. The 5 families had survived wars, betrayals, assassinations, federal crackdowns, but even they could not survive exposure. And Colombo was exposing them all. One man's fame was becoming an entire organization's threat. The Mafia thrives in silence. Colombo was making noise. The Mafia thrives in darkness. Colombo was bringing light. The Mafia kills those who endanger it. And Colombo was walking straight into danger. He didn't realize it yet, but the whispers had already begun shaping his fate. In the Mafia, you don't need a verdict. You don't need a meeting. You don't need evidence. You need only one thing: attention. And Joe Colombo had far too much of it. The news traveled faster than gunfire. Crazy Joe Gallo was coming home. In the back alleys of Brooklyn, in the neon-lit bars of Manhattan, in the cramped social clubs where old men whispered about the past, a chill swept through the air. It was the kind of chill that makes the hair on a man's arms stand straight, primal, instinctive, impossible to ignore. Because Joe Gallo wasn't just another gangster returning from a bid. He was chaos wearing a smile. He was the storm you hoped would stay just over the horizon. And now he was back. When the gates of the prison slid open, Gallo walked out with the cool confidence of a man who never felt trapped to begin with. Leaner, sharper, eyes burning with mischief and menace, he carried an energy that made even seasoned killers uneasy. Most men leave prison quieter, more humble, more cautious. Gallo left louder. He stepped into the sunlight like a man returning to a throne that had been temporarily loaned out. Cigarette between his lips, suit pressed, chin high, as if the world had been waiting for him, pausing mid-breath, eager to see what he would do next. And for Colombo, this was the omen he had prayed would never arrive. Because Gallo didn't see New York the way normal men did. He saw it like a battlefield waiting for orders. To him, fear wasn't a weapon, it was oxygen. Violence wasn't a risk, it was art. There were stories, endless, chilling stories, about the things Gallo had done before prison, the things that earned him his reputation long before he became a household name. He kidnapped bosses, shot rivals in broad daylight, insulted men who could kill him with a nod. And he did it all with a grin. A grin that said, Dare me. The Mafia claimed to fear no man. But they feared Crazy Joe. Even the fearless did. Colombo, already drowning in the attention he had created, felt the ground shift beneath him. Gallo's return wasn't just inconvenient, it was a threat. A direct, personal threat. Because if there was anyone bold enough, reckless enough, and cunning enough to strike at the heart of his newfound fame, it was Gallo. He was a lit fuse. A walking provocation. A man who invited death, but refused to die. Colombo knew the balance of power was about to tilt, violently, unpredictably, and he could feel danger breathing down his neck. Meanwhile, the underworld buzzed like a disturbed hive. Soldiers talked in shadows. Capos stayed awake at night. Old bosses exchanged glances, filled with dread. Gallo was a different breed. He wasn't bound by old codes. He wasn't softened by hierarchy. He didn't care who you were, only whether you were in his way. Some said prison had made him smarter. Others said it made him more dangerous. A few whispered the truth. Gallo was born dangerous. Before he went away, he had waged a personal war against the Colombo family, a war of bullets, betrayals, and bodies. And now that he was free, no one believed he would simply go home, sit quietly, and drink espresso like the rest of them.
No.
Crazy Joe had unfinished business. He returned to the streets with an almost theatrical presence. The neighborhood felt it immediately, a tension, a shake in the air, like thunder rolling beneath the pavement. Kids smiled at him. Women eyed him with fascination. Men swallowed hard when he walked by. He was charismatic in a way that felt wrong, charming in a way that made your instincts tighten. He would shake your hand warmly, while his other hand toyed with the idea of violence. He had that rare quality, magnetic and menacing at the same time. And for the Mafia, that combination was lethal. Gallo didn't have to make threats. His presence alone was a declaration. He didn't need to announce his intentions. His history spoke louder than words. Everyone knew his return was the spark the Mafia had feared, the one that would ignite old grudges, reopen old wounds, and turn suspicion into bloodshed. Men who once vowed loyalty to Colombo now hesitated. Men who once hunted Gallo now avoided saying his name. Men who once felt secure now glanced over their shoulders. Because Crazy Joe didn't simply step back into the streets.
He invaded them.
He walked through Little Italy like a man measuring land he already owned. He spoke with reporters like he enjoyed the attention. He laughed in bars like he had no enemies in the world. But inside that laugh, there was a blade. The kind that glints before it cuts. And the bosses? They felt it too. Meetings grew tense. Voices grew quieter. The unspoken fear grew louder. Gambino, watching from his quiet, shadowed throne, knew exactly what this meant. The old man didn't deal in emotion. He dealt in outcomes. And he understood something most refused to say out loud. A man like Gallo doesn't return to live. He returns to finish. To finish grudges. To finish wars. To finish enemies. And Colombo was at the top of that list. The streets sensed it, a storm forming. The kind of storm that doesn't just bring rain, it brings bodies. Gallo walked with the confidence of a man who didn't fear death because he had already danced with it. His unpredictability made him even more dangerous. He could smile at you one moment and tear your world apart the next. Colombo felt the shadow creeping closer. The Mafia felt the shift in balance. The city felt something dark stirring. Chaos had returned in human form. And his name was Crazy Joe Gallo. Everyone knew what came next. They just didn't know when. The sun was high, burning bright over the sea of faces gathered for Joe Colombo's grand rally, the largest one he had ever attempted. Flags waved. Cameras rolled. Families leaned against barricades, smiling, clapping, cheering as if the day were a celebration and not a warning. Colombo walked through the crowd like a conquering hero, shaking hands, laughing, basking in the warm glow of public adoration. The air buzzed with excitement, but beneath that energy ran a subtle, invisible current, the kind only the streets could feel. A tension, a shift, a whisper. Something was wrong, but no one knew what. Not yet. Colombo didn't sense it either. Or if he did, he ignored it, swallowed it whole, the way men in power often swallow danger, too accustomed to surviving to believe they could die. Then the moment came. A man stepped out from the crowd. No warning. No hesitation. No fear. Just a hand rising. Just a gun gleaming in the daylight. And then,
3 shots.
the sound cracked through the rally like thunder tearing open the sky. The cheers collapsed into screams. People scattered in every direction, tripping, falling, clawing at the air as panic swallowed the crowd whole. Colombo staggered backward. One shot tore through his head, another through his neck, another through his chest. His body twisted like a marionette with its strings cut, collapsing onto the pavement as blood spilled across the ground, bright and shocking against the concrete. A man who had survived street wars, mafia betrayals, political storms, brought down in broad daylight, in front of thousands. Just like that, chaos erupted. Mothers pulled their children away. Reporters dropped their cameras. Police shoved through the crowd. Too late, far too late. Men screamed Colombo's name. Women cried. Sirens wailed. And somewhere in the madness, the gunman, Jerome Johnson, was tackled, beaten, questioned, killed. Whether he was silenced by the crowd or by someone who wanted him quiet, no one knew. No one would ever know. His blood soaked the street just inches from Colombo's. 2 dead men. One message. And the Mafia felt it instantly. Word spread through the city with the speed of fear. They got Colombo. Who did it? Did you hear? 3 shots. This wasn't random. Televisions blared the footage. Radios replayed the chaos. Newspapers rushed out special editions. But the streets were always ahead of the news. Within minutes, not hours, the underworld had already drawn its conclusion. Crazy Joe Gallo. The name rose like smoke from every corner of Brooklyn. Men muttered it in social clubs. Soldiers spat it out like venom. Wives whispered it over dinner tables. Even children heard it outside candy shops. Because only one man was wild enough, bold enough, and angry enough to strike at Colombo in such a public, humiliating way. Only one man had history. Only one man had motive. Only one man had been waiting.
Gallo.
Crazy Joe. The mad dog unleashed from prison. But the question hung in the air like a ghost. Was the shooter a lone madman or a hired gun? Even the police wondered. Even the reporters speculated. But the Mafia? The Mafia never wonders. The Mafia decides. And they decided instantly. This had Gallo's signature written all over it. The chaos, the spectacle, the boldness, the audacity. If someone wanted to humiliate a rival boss, this was how you did it. In the Mafia's rulebook, killing a boss is one thing. Killing him in front of thousands is another. It's not just murder. It's a message. A declaration of war. And the moment Colombo hit the ground, bleeding out while sirens wailed around him, the Mafia heard that message loud and clear. Inside the Colombo family's inner circle, fear turned to fury. Men grabbed guns. Others called for meetings. Soldiers ran through the streets, restless and hungry for revenge. The tension was palpable, a pressure building, threatening to explode. In the Gambino family, men exchanged uneasy looks. Gambino himself watched the news with expressionless eyes, his mind already calculating outcomes, consequences, and next moves. A boss had been shot. Someone had dared to challenge the order of things. This wasn't just violence. This wasn't just madness. This was a violation of the ancient Mafia code, the invisible law that governed the underworld. To kill a man is business. To kill a boss is war. To kill a boss in public, that is unforgivable. And unforgivable crimes require unforgiving punishments. But the deepest question lurked beneath the surface, one the Mafia would never ask out loud. Was Gallo really behind it? Or was he just the most convenient villain? Some thought the shooter was a pawn. Some said the feds had set the stage. Some whispered that rival families had orchestrated the hit from behind velvet curtains. Some even believed Colombo's own people had grown tired of the spotlight he dragged them into. But conspiracies are dangerous in the Mafia. Whispers can get a man killed. Rumors can bury entire families. So the streets settled on the simplest explanation, the one soaked in old grudges and familiar blood. Crazy Joe Gallo did this. Whether it was true didn't matter. Perception becomes reality. Belief becomes motive. Motive becomes death. By nightfall, Colombo lay in a hospital bed, unmoving, machines breathing for him. The man who had once commanded crowds now hovered between life and death, silent and fragile. But outside that hospital, a different battle was brewing. Revenge had already begun to stir in the hearts of his men. Rage simmered in the corners of dimly lit clubs. Soldiers sharpened knives, loaded guns, prepared cars. Gallo had been targeted before. But after this, he was a dead man walking. Because the Mafia doesn't forgive. And it never forgets. Blood had been spilled in daylight. And daylight demands an answer. Crazy Joe Gallo moved through New York City like a man who'd already died once and decided he preferred life better. He was a ghost with a pulse. A legend with an expiration date. A target walking on borrowed time with a smile carved across his face. The streets felt it before he did. The tension, the shift, the silence that follows a verdict. Because the moment Joe Colombo collapsed in a pool of his own blood, the Mafia drew the same conclusion. Crazy Joe did this. Whether he pulled the trigger or not didn't matter. The story had chosen its villain. And villains in the Mafia don't get second chances. But Gallo? He acted like he had 1,000. He walked through Little Italy with the swagger of a man who thought death was too intimidated to approach him. People stepped aside when he passed, some out of fear, some out of admiration, some out of a curiosity that bordered on morbid fascination. He greeted strangers. He cracked jokes. He lit cigarettes for women. He charmed waiters. He told stories loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. But beneath all that charm was something colder, a defiance sharp enough to cut. The kind of defiance only a man certain of his own myth could carry. High society adored him. The newspapers called him the gangster philosopher. Socialites whispered his name like he was a dangerous thrill they wanted to taste once. He sipped wine with artists. He attended parties in Manhattan lofts. He rubbed shoulders with people who'd only seen gangsters in movies. But outside those penthouses in the real world, the Mafia world, men loaded guns with his name in their teeth. Gallo didn't care. Or maybe he cared too much. Because every time someone told him to hide, to lay low, to disappear until the fire died down, he laughed, a laugh that cut through the air like broken glass. They ain't got the balls to do it, he said. Over and over. To friends. To family. To strangers. They ain't got the balls. He said it like a man daring fate to prove him wrong. But his friends knew better. His brother begged him to stay indoors. His crew pleaded with him to keep a low profile. His wife whispered warnings at night. Even his newly acquired socialite companions told him he was tempting something bigger than ego, bigger than anger, bigger than the Mafia itself. Gallo brushed them all off. Fear was for other men. Caution was for men with something to lose. But Gallo felt untouchable, or maybe just tired of pretending he wasn't doomed. And so he walked. Every block a challenge. Every corner a coin toss. Every breath a countdown ticking quietly behind him. The streets of Little Italy felt different when he appeared. Sicilian men standing outside cafes stopped mid-conversation. Young soldiers lowered their eyes. Old men crossed themselves under their breath, unsure whether they were seeing a walking legend or a walking corpse. He strutted past them all like he owned the pavement. Not like a man being hunted, but like a man daring the hunters to step forward. The neighborhood buzzed with tension. You could feel it in the air, a thickness, a heaviness, like the atmosphere before a violent storm. Even the buildings seemed to lean in and listen. At night, when the city softened and the sky glowed with a faint neon haze, Gallo would roam the village as if he were sightseeing instead of evading death. He walked into bars with a grin, sat at tables with his back exposed, ordered drinks like invitations. He talked to anyone. He charmed everyone. He trusted no one except fate. People whispered behind his back. That man's not scared of anything. He's asking for it. He's crazy, but he's brave. But bravery and arrogance are separated by a line so thin it's almost invisible. And Gallo had crossed it long ago. Some nights, he ended up in places he shouldn't be. Clubs where everyone knew the Mafia had eyes, restaurants where killers had sat at the same tables hours before, street corners where shadows swallowed sound. He knew the rules of survival. Stay low. Stay hidden. Stay unpredictable. And he broke every one of them. But that was Joe Gallo, the man who looked at rules and saw suggestions. The man who believed he could outsmile bullets. The man who believed his charm could outtalk death. The man who believed mythology made him immortal. But in the Mafia, you don't outrun consequences. You don't rewrite your destiny. You don't cheat death, not forever. Every time Gallo turned a corner, someone watched. Every time he lit a cigarette, someone memorized the moment. Every time he walked into a bar, someone noted the entrance. He lived loudly in a world where survival required silence. He moved boldly in a world where survival required shadows. He breathed freely in a world where each breath could be his last. His enemies prayed he wouldn't hide, prayed he'd keep tempting fate, keep walking those same paths, keep showing his face in the same neighborhoods. Because men who hunt prefer prey that stands still. And Gallo was standing still in plain sight. He was the rare kind of condemned man who refused to acknowledge the sentence, as if denial alone could rewrite fate. But fate doesn't negotiate. Fate doesn't bargain. Fate doesn't care. Every step Gallo took felt heavier. Every night walk felt quieter. Every door he opened carried the same silent question. Is this the moment? He felt it. Somewhere deep beneath the laughter, beneath the swagger, beneath the bravado, he knew. He knew he was surrounded by a hatred sharpening itself in the dark. He knew bullets had been assigned to his name. He knew men were rehearsing his last moments. But pride can blind even the sharpest mind. And Gallo's pride was bigger than the street, bigger than the Mafia, bigger than the truth. So he kept walking. Through Little Italy. Through the village. Through the city that loved him almost as much as it hated him. A living legend. A walking target. A dead man refusing to lie down. Every step, a dare. Every breath, a countdown. Every moment, a reminder. You can mock death. You can outrun it. You can laugh in its face. But in the Mafia, death always laughs last. April 7th, 1972. Joe Gallo woke up on his birthday with the unshakable confidence of a man who believed fate was on his side. He had survived wars, assassination attempts, betrayals, and vendettas. He had walked the streets of New York like a defiant ghost, daring the Mafia to strike him down. And once again, he ignored the warnings. His wife warned him. His crew warned him. Even his enemies, in their own silent way, warned him. By the simple fact that they were too quiet. But Crazy Joe didn't care. He wanted a celebration. A big one. Public. Visible.
Loud.
The kind of night only a man in denial of his own mortality would choose. So, where did he go? The Copa. The glittering, celebrity-filled nightclub where New York's rich and famous gathered. Where cameras flashed. Where eyes followed. Where his enemies didn't need to search. They only needed to listen. Inside the Copacabana, Gallo was in his element. He laughed too loud. He drank too much. He waved at people he'd never met. He pulled his wife close and kissed her like the world belonged to him. The music thumped. The lights glowed. Strangers toasted him because it was his birthday. But beneath the velvet, beneath the champagne, beneath the applause, danger was sharpening its blade in the dark. Somewhere, someone was passing a message. He's out tonight. He's celebrating. He's exposed. The hunters were listening. The night stretched on. Gallo soaked in the attention, the energy, the illusion of safety. But illusions always break. Around 4 a.m., the party thinned. Gallo gathered his wife, his sister, his stepdaughter, his loyal friend Pete the Greek, and Pete's girlfriend. They stepped out into the cold New York air, still buzzing with excitement from the night. And then, in a moment thick with fate, Gallo made his final decision. Let's get something to eat. Those 7 words sealed his destiny. Because where he chose to go was not some hidden location, not a private room, not a safe house. He chose Umberto's clam house in Little Italy. A place that didn't just attract attention, it created it. It was his last mistake. They walked inside at dawn. Tired, buzzing, laughing. No one noticed the men outside. No one saw the shadows shifting. No one sensed the predators closing in with the inevitability of a closing door. Inside, the family sat. They ordered. They chatted. And then time cracked open. The killers moved like thunder, silent, fast, merciless. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They didn't hesitate. They simply entered through the side door and opened fire. Gunshots exploded through the restaurant, shattering glass, ripping through furniture, bouncing off walls. The sound was deafening, a violent punctuation that ended all doubts, all theories, all whispers. This was not a warning. This was not a message. This was not revenge. This was an execution. Joe Gallo jumped to his feet, instinct firing through him like electricity. His chair fell backwards. The table flipped. Chaos swallowed the room. Women screamed. Men ducked. Bullets tore through the air with deadly precision. One shot slammed into Gallo's arm. Another ripped across his torso. Another tore into his back as he tried to escape through the front door. His family cried out. Pete the Greek went down. Glass exploded around them like tiny stars falling. Gallo stumbled out into the street, bleeding, gasping, trembling. But he was still alive. Still fighting. Still refusing to die quietly. The street was empty. Silent. Cold. Gallo staggered forward, hands clawing at the pavement, leaving a trail of blood across Mulberry Street. He tried to pull himself upright, but his legs buckled beneath him. He tried to call for help, but his lungs filled with heat and iron. He tried to run, but death had already laid its hand upon him. He collapsed onto the pavement, face pale, breath shallow, blood pooling beneath him. And then, he stopped moving, dead before he hit the ground. The city exhaled, as if releasing a breath it had been holding for months. The quiet after the gunfire was haunting. Not peaceful, not gentle, not forgiving. It was the quiet of a verdict delivered. A war ended. A debt paid. Within minutes, word spread through the underworld like a lightning bolt cracking open the sky. They got Gallo. He's dead. Crazy Joe is gone. Some men nodded. Some whispered prayers. Some smiled darkly into their drinks. Even those who hated him felt a shiver. Because his death wasn't just a murder, it was a message. A warning. A reminder. No matter how loud you shout, no matter how bright you burn, no matter how boldly you tempt fate, no man is bigger than the Mafia. Not a legend. Not a celebrity gangster. Not a mad dog who refused to hide. Gallo's reign ended where it was always destined to, in the street, under the dawn light, with bullets chasing his last breath. The execution was cold, precise, inevitable, and the message, written in gunpowder and blood, echoed through the city. Defy the Mafia, and the Mafia will bury you. When Joe Gallo's body hit the pavement, New York City felt the shock ripple through its bones. The sun rose on a different kind of morning, one where the air tasted heavier, where whispers hung in the corners of cafes, where old men spoke softly over their espresso cups as if afraid the dead were still listening. The streets mourned. Families cried. But the Mafia, cold, ancient, unyielding, moved on. Men died. Wars ended. Life continued. Because in the underworld, grief is a luxury. And revenge is routine. Yet something lingered after Gallo's death. Something darker than the blood drying on Mulberry Street. Something that couldn't be buried with the body. A legacy of fear. For the people who lived in those neighborhoods, mothers holding their children a little closer, shopkeepers locking their doors earlier, priests lighting extra candles, the murder was a reminder of an old truth. The Mafia ruled the streets, but no one ruled the Mafia. And when their wars erupted, it was the city that bled. New Yorkers had grown used to danger. They'd grown used to walking past social clubs where men in suits watched silently from the shadows. They'd grown used to the occasional siren, the occasional headline, the occasional closed-casket funeral. But the Colombo-Gallo War was different. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't quiet. It was bullets in daylight, fear in the open, violence invading every corner of public life. It broke the illusion that the Mafia's battles stayed in the dark. It proved that when bosses fight, no one is safe. Colombo lay dying in a hospital bed. Gallo lay cold in the morgue. Two families shattered. Dozens of lives uprooted. But the institution they died for? It kept breathing. Like an old, wounded animal, the Mafia limped forward, bruised, exposed, but still alive. Yet beneath its stubborn heartbeat, something had cracked. The violence of the 1970s didn't just claim bodies. It fractured the foundation the five families had built their empire upon. It revealed something the bosses never wanted the world to see. Their power was slipping. Their control was weakening. Their silence was breaking. And the city, filled with reporters, prosecutors, undercover agents, and citizens who had seen too much, was beginning to wake up. This war had consequences the Mafia couldn't see from their smoke-filled rooms. The FBI, long frustrated by decades of dead ends, finally found leverage. Politicians, long intimidated by the shadow of organized crime, smelled blood in the water. Journalists, hungry for headlines, sunk their teeth into every scandal, every court case, every informant whispering in the night. Newspapers printed what had once only been spoken behind closed doors. Television anchors spoke names the Mafia had tried to bury in silence. Courtrooms filled with witnesses who'd once sworn oaths of loyalty. The Colombo-Gallo War didn't just expose cracks in the Mafia. It exposed the Mafia itself. And once the truth leaked into the world, the extortion, the rackets, the murders, the power struggles, the unraveling began. Not immediately, not dramatically, not with one big fall,
but slowly, silently,
invisibly, the way all empires die. For the families left behind, fear became an inheritance. Widows sat in dark kitchens praying their sons wouldn't follow the same path. Daughters stared at folded suits hanging in closets, still smelling of their father's cologne. Mothers cried into handkerchiefs as funeral processions filled the streets. Some families moved away. Some stayed, too rooted or too afraid to leave. Some embraced the life that had taken everything from them. But none escaped the shadow the Mafia cast over their lives. The streets remembered the blood. The walls remembered the whispers. The children remembered the gunshots. A generation grew up knowing that violence wasn't an accident, it was tradition. And in that way, the Mafia didn't just kill men. It killed childhoods, killed innocence, killed futures. But perhaps the greatest wound of all was to the Mafia itself. The 1970s violence marked the beginning of the end, not with a bang, but with a slow, creeping decay. The men who once ruled with silent terror were now hunted by their own ghosts. Rivals turned on each other. Alliances frayed. The old codes eroded. The sacred omerta weakened. And the public, once too afraid to speak, began to turn on them. The courts cracked down. Prosecutions ramped up. Surveillance tightened. The government evolved. The Mafia didn't. They were too busy fighting their own wars to see the bigger war closing in around them. Like kings obsessed with their own thrones while the castle burned beneath them. Colombo and Gallo were two men in a long, bloody history, but their final clash symbolized something bigger. The end of an era. The end of untouchability. The end of fear as a shield. New York would never be the same. The five families would never be the same. The Mafia itself would survive, but never again with the dominance it once held. Their downfall wasn't caused by the FBI, or the courts, or the law.
It was caused by themselves,
by their egos, their grudges, their bloodlust. The seeds of their destruction were planted by their own hands, watered with revenge, nourished with pride, and ultimately harvested in violence. The Colombo-Gallo War didn't just kill two men. It killed the illusion of Mafia invincibility. It killed centuries-old codes of silence. It killed an era of fear that once ruled America. And what remained? A haunted city, broken families, a crumbling dynasty, and a truth that would echo long after the bullet stopped. Even the most powerful men can bleed. Even the most feared empires can fall. And even legends are mortal. When power is built on fear, and fear eventually turns inward, how long can an empire survive before it destroys itself? Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and share this video. Click on the screen to watch the next one.